Let us journey back in time to the year 1410, to a vast and rolling landscape in what is now modern-day Poland. On the fields of Grunwald, two massive armies faced each other, ready for a battle that would decide the fate of nations. On one side stood the Teutonic Knights, a powerful and feared crusading order that had dominated Eastern Europe for centuries, their white mantles emblazoned with a stark, black cross. On the other side stood a great coalition of Polish and Lithuanian forces, a new and powerful alliance determined to break the Knights' iron grip on the region. As the dawn broke on that fateful July morning, a thick mist clung to the vast plain, a plain dotted with small clusters of trees and rocky outcrops. King Władysław II, Jagiełło of Poland, rallied his troops, his voice ringing out across the field. "Today," he declared, "we fight for the future of our lands." Neither side could have possibly imagined the profound and lasting impact this single battle would have on the future of Europe. The clash that followed would not only decide the destiny of nations, but would reshape the very balance of power for centuries to come. But to truly understand the significance of this momentous battle, we must first understand the story of the Teutonic Knights themselves. Who were these formidable warrior monks? In the early 13th century, a powerful new military order emerged in the Baltic region, one that would forever alter the course of Eastern European history. This was the Order of the Teutonic Knights of St. Mary's Hospital in Jerusalem. Originally founded during the Crusades in the Holy Land, the Knights sought a new purpose and a new mission after the fall of Acre in 1291. They turned their attention to the still pagan lands of Prussia and Lithuania, where they saw a golden opportunity to continue their holy mission of Christianization while simultaneously carving out a powerful new territory for themselves. The Knights' arrival in the Baltic was marked by an intense religious zeal and an undeniable military prowess. They skillfully justified their conquests as a divine calling, framing their campaigns as a righteous crusade against the pagan tribes of the north. This powerful ideological framework attracted a great deal of support and vast resources from across Christian Europe, including noble second sons who were eager for glory, land, and adventure. As the Teutonic Knights began their expansion, they were met with fierce and desperate resistance from the local pagan tribes. The Prussians, the Lithuanians, and the other Baltic peoples fought with incredible bravery to preserve their lands, their ancient beliefs, and their way of life. However, the Knights' superior military technology, their highly disciplined organization, and their advanced tactics gradually overwhelmed the native resistance. Their use of heavy cavalry, powerful crossbows, and sophisticated siege engines proved to be the decisive factor in many of their engagements. But the Teutonic Knights' success in battle was matched by their incredible skill in administration and construction. As they conquered new territories, they established a unique and powerful monastic state, one that cleverly combined a deep religious fervor with an efficient feudal system of governance. The very landscape of Prussia and Livonia became dotted with their impressive and imposing brick fortresses, each one serving as a center of military power and Christian influence. Great cities like Marienburg rose to prominence, showcasing the order's immense wealth and their remarkable architectural prowess. The Knights' own organizational structure contributed significantly to their rapid territorial gains. The order was neatly divided into military, clerical, and servant branches, which allowed for the incredibly efficient management of both the arts of warfare and the arts of governance. This well-organized system attracted skilled warriors, talented craftsmen, experienced administrators, and devout clerics from all across Europe, all of whom contributed to the remarkable growth and stability of the Teutonic state. By the late 14th century, the Teutonic Knights controlled vast territories all along the Baltic coast, stretching from Pomerania all the way to the Gulf of Finland. Their influence extended far beyond their own borders as they became key players in the complex world of medieval European politics. Their powerful navy allowed them to dominate the lucrative Baltic trade routes, which further enhanced their already considerable wealth and influence. But the very zenith of Teutonic power coincided with the rise of growing tensions in the region. The Order's aggressive and often brutal expansion, coupled with their harsh treatment of the peoples they had conquered, created a deep and lasting resentment among their neighbours. The Lithuanians, who had recently converted to Christianity and were now allied with the powerful Kingdom of Poland through the Union of Krakow in 1385, began to view the Teutonic Knights not as their fellow Christians, but as dangerous and predatory rivals. And so, as the 15th century dawned, a formidable new challenge to Teutonic dominance had finally emerged. The powerful Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, an alliance that would finally have the strength to challenge the long and bloody reign of the Black Cross of the North. As the formidable Teutonic Knights reached the absolute zenith of their power, an unexpected and powerful new alliance began to emerge, one that would rise up to challenge their long-held dominance in the Baltic region. The year 1385 marked a truly pivotal moment in Eastern European history, as a controversial and strategic marriage would begin to reshape the entire political landscape of the region. The two great nations of Poland and Lithuania, who had for a long time been rivals, now found themselves at a great historical crossroads. The ever-present and ever-growing threat of the Teutonic Order's expansion loomed large over both of their nations, a common danger that finally forced them to reconsider their traditional enmity and to seek a new path forward together. At the heart of this great shift was a proposed marriage alliance between the Grand Duke of Lithuania, Jagiełło, and the young and beloved Queen of Poland, Jadwiga. Can you imagine the intense debate that this proposal must have sparked in the courts of both nations? Jagiełło, who was known for his sharp political acumen and his leadership of the last great pagan state in Europe, saw this union as a powerful means to secure his realm against the constant and brutal threat of the Teutonic Knights' crusades. Jadwiga, who was revered by her people for her deep piety and a wisdom that seemed far beyond her young years, recognized the immense strategic importance of this alliance, even though it meant setting aside her own personal betrothal for the good of her kingdom. And so, despite some initial reservations and the complexities of bringing these two different worlds together, the Great Union of Krakow was signed on August 14th, 1385. This momentous decision created a personal union between the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. As part of this agreement, Jagiełło converted to Christianity, was baptized, married the young Queen Jadwiga, and in the year 1386, he was crowned King of Poland as Władysław II Jagiełło. This single event fundamentally altered the political and, perhaps more importantly, the religious landscape of all of Eastern Europe. The official conversion of Lithuania, the very last pagan state in Europe, sent shockwaves throughout the entire continent. And who felt these shockwaves most acutely? The Teutonic Knights. Suddenly, their primary justification for their existence in the region, their holy crusade against the pagan Lithuanians, was completely undermined. The Polish-Lithuanian Union now stood as a formidable Christian power, directly challenging the Knights' long-held dominance in the Baltic. But this new union was not without its own internal challenges. Many of the powerful Lithuanian nobles feared losing their influence and their unique cultural identity within this new, larger Catholic Commonwealth. And Jagiełło's own ambitious cousin, Vytautas, emerged as a powerful and often contentious figure in Lithuania, frequently finding himself at odds with Jagiełło's policies. Their complex and often stormy relationship shaped the early years of the Commonwealth. This internal power struggle was eventually resolved through the 1392 Ostrów agreement, a clever compromise that granted Vytautas significant autonomy as the Grand Duke of Lithuania, while he, in turn, still recognized Jagiełło's overall authority as the King of Poland. This compromise helped to stabilize the new union, allowing both Poland and Lithuania to maintain their own distinct identities while presenting a powerful and united front to any external threats. And what was the result of this unlikely union? The new Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was now able to combine the considerable resources of both nations. Like a mighty oak tree growing from two intertwined saplings, the Commonwealth's strength increased exponentially, allowing it to field much larger armies and to exert far greater diplomatic influence than either nation could have ever hoped to achieve on its own. The union also facilitated a rich and vibrant cultural exchange between the two nations. Polish nobles introduced Western European customs to Lithuania, while Lithuanian boyars, in turn, gained new and powerful opportunities within the expanded realm. This cultural cross-pollination led to the development of a unique and powerful Polish-Lithuanian identity. By the year 1400, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had emerged as a major new player in European politics. Its vast territories now stretched all the way from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, encompassing a diverse and powerful population. The combined might of Poland and Lithuania had created a formidable new force, one that was finally ready to challenge the long and bloody reign of the Teutonic Order. As the dawn of the 15th century broke over the vast landscapes of Eastern Europe, a question, both simple and profound, hung heavy in the air. If the Grand Duchy of Lithuania had now officially converted to Christianity, why did the Teutonic Knights continue their relentless crusade? The answer, my friend, lay not in the pages of scripture, but in a complex and tangled web of simmering religious doubts, deep-seated territorial ambitions, and bitter economic rivalries that would soon cause this powder keg of a region to erupt into open and devastating warfare. The Teutonic Order's long and brutal expansion into Lithuania had been marked by a series of bloody raids, particularly targeting the strategic region of Samogitia. Why was this land so important? Because it formed a crucial land bridge, linking the Knights' core territories in Prussia with their northern holdings in Livonia. Control of Samogitia was essential to the unity and the power of their monastic state. And so, despite Lithuania's official Christianization, the Knights continued to publicly question the sincerity of this conversion. Was it a true change of heart, they asked, or merely a clever political maneuver? They used this manufactured doubt as a powerful ideological justification for continuing their aggressive military campaigns. And so, the dispute over the fate of Samogitia became the central and most volatile focal point of the growing tension. A previous treaty, the Peace of Raciange in 1404, had officially placed the region under Teutonic control, but this arrangement was far from stable. The inhabitants of Samogitia, a fiercely independent people, bitterly resisted this outside rule, and their land became a constant flashpoint for conflict between the Order and the newly formed Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But Poland, too, harbored its own deep and long-standing grievances against the Teutonic Knights. The control of Dobrzyn land remained a bitter and contentious issue, with Poland continuing to assert its rightful historical claim to the territory. Polish ambitions also extended to the vital port city of Gdansk, which was under the firm control of the Teutonic Order. These simmering territorial disputes only intensified the growing hostilities between the two great powers. But there was another, even more powerful driver of this conflict: money. Economic factors played a crucial and often overlooked role in exacerbating the tensions. The Teutonic Order's strategic control over the lower reaches of the great rivers, the Nieman, the Vistula, and the Daugava, gave them a virtual stranglehold on the crucial trade routes of the entire region. This powerful monopoly threatened the prosperity and the economic autonomy of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, further straining the already fragile relations between the two powers. The Knights' relentless accumulation of power and territory naturally began to alarm other rulers in the region. The delicate balance of power in Eastern Europe was now teetering precariously, with the Order's expansionist policies threatening to upset the entire equilibrium. What about diplomacy? Could a peaceful solution be found? The diplomatic efforts to resolve these mounting tensions proved to be largely futile and ultimately fruitless. A truce was signed on October 8, 1409, which was meant to provide a cooling-off period set to expire on June 24, 1410. However, both sides viewed this brief interlude not as a chance for peace, but as valuable time to prepare their forces for the inevitable conflict that they knew was coming. Even the king of the Romans, Wenceslaus, attempted to mediate the dispute, but his intervention only managed to inflame the situation further. His declaration that Samogitia rightfully belonged to the Teutonic Order was seen by the Polish-Lithuanian side as a clear and unacceptable bias, which only served to further entrench both sides in their positions. The spark that finally ignited this great powder keg came in May of 1409. An uprising erupted in Samogitia against Teutonic rule, a rebellion that was actively and openly supported by the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. This was a direct and undeniable challenge to the Order's authority, a line in the sand that could not be ignored. The knights responded with force, not only moving to brutally quash the uprising, but also by launching a full-scale invasion of Polish territories. This aggressive and escalatory action was the final straw. On August 6, 1409, the Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights formally declared war on the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. The die was now cast. The stage was finally set for a momentous and bloody confrontation that would reshape the political landscape of all of Eastern Europe. As the grim spectre of war now loomed large over the landscapes of Eastern Europe, both the Teutonic Knights and the newly formed Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth began the immense and arduous task of mustering their forces for the coming conflict. The Grand Master of the Teutonic Order, the proud and confident Ulrich von Jungingen, initially devised a strategy that was based on a critical and ultimately fatal miscalculation. He expected the Commonwealth to act as two separate entities, and so he planned for two separate invasions, one into Poland and one into Lithuania. He believed he could fight and defeat them one at a time. This fundamental misunderstanding of the unity and the coordination of the new alliance would prove to be a costly and disastrous error, as the unified front of the Commonwealth would soon catch the Knights completely and dangerously off guard. On the other side, the Polish-Lithuanian army, under the joint command of the patient King Władysław II Jagiełło and the brilliant and energetic Grand Duke Vytautas, began to orchestrate a massive and secret troop movement in late June of 1410. In a stunning display of strategic coordination, the Allied forces from all across Poland and Lithuania began to converge at a single, secret location, the town of Chernivtsi. And it was here that they would face their first great challenge. To bring their combined army into the heart of Teutonic territory, they needed to cross the wide and formidable Vistula River. How do you move an army of tens of thousands of men, their horses, and their heavy supplies across such a great waterway without being detected by the enemy? The answer was a marvel of medieval military engineering. Jagiełło and Vytautas had commissioned the secret construction of a great pontoon bridge, a floating bridge of boats, that would allow for the swift and silent passage of their thousands of troops. Day and night, the massive host streamed across the Vistula, their movements hidden by the river's twisting course and the dense forest that lined its banks. This incredible operation took the Teutonic Knights completely by surprise. Grandmaster Ulrich von Jungingen had concentrated his main forces at Schwedt, expecting an attack there. When the news of the Allies' massive advance finally reached him, he realized, with a growing sense of dread, that the Polish-Lithuanian force was driving straight for the very heart of the Order's territory, the great fortress of Marienburg itself. And what were these two great armies like? They were a fascinating and stark contrast. The Polish-Lithuanian army was a diverse and colourful host. Its core was organized into three great lines of wedge-shaped formations. The formidable Polish heavy cavalry, the pride of the kingdom, armed with long, heavy lances and great swords, formed the powerful left flank. These mounted nobles wore heavy plate armor, their powerful horses often protected by chainmail barding. On the right flank stood the Lithuanian light cavalry, a very different kind of fighting force. They were equipped with powerful composite bows and lighter armor, which allowed for increased mobility and hit-and-run tactics. The Teutonic Knights, in contrast, were the very embodiment of Western European military tradition. They had called upon their supporters from all across Europe, and their forces were renowned for their iron discipline and their superior, standardized equipment. The heart and soul of their army was the knights' heavy cavalry, those warrior monks clad in their iconic white surcoats, emblazoned with the stark black cross. They wielded heavy maces and great battle axes, their armor a fearsome combination of plate and chainmail. Supporting them were thousands of their own skilled crossbowmen, whose powerful weapons could pierce even the heaviest armor at a considerable distance. Both sides also engaged in a flurry of diplomatic maneuvering, seeking to bring allies to their cause. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth managed to secure the support of forces from Bohemia and Moravia, and even enlisted the help of nomadic Tatar cavalry units, adding yet another layer of diversity and tactical flexibility to their already impressive army. This complex web of alliances highlighted the intricate politics of medieval Europe. The preparations for this great battle were not without their own human stories and challenges. One Polish chronicler recorded the struggle of a young soldier named Jakub, who spent days fashioning his own makeshift armor from boiled leather and scraps of metal, only to have it fall apart during a training exercise. A small, personal story that speaks to the immense logistical effort required to equip such a massive army. And so, as the early summer of 1410 dawned, two massive armies stood poised on the brink of a historic conflict. The Polish-Lithuanian force represented a powerful new alliance, a rising power in Eastern Europe, while the Teutonic Knights embodied the old, crusading order. The outcome of the impending battle would reshape the balance of power in the region for generations to come, and as the two armies maneuvered across the Prussian landscape of rolling hills, forests, and marshes, a major and decisive confrontation became inevitable. As the long shadows of twilight descended upon the fields near Grunwald, Tannenberg, and Ludwigsdorf on the evening of July 14th, 1410, an unsettling and profound quiet blanketed the landscape. This was the chosen battleground, a gently rolling expanse of fields, punctuated by small dark woods and shimmering lakes, a place that would soon bear witness to one of the largest and most consequential battles in all of medieval European history. On one side, the Polish-Lithuanian forces, a vast and diverse host, numerically superior, but varied in their equipment and their training, stood ready. Opposite them, the Teutonic Knights, fewer in number but clad in their superior, gleaming armor and wielding the most advanced weaponry of their time, formed their disciplined ranks. The very air on this night seemed to pulse with a palpable tension, as both great camps prepared for the impending, violent clash. Can you picture the scene? By the flickering orange light of thousands of campfires, the soldiers on both sides made their final preparations. It was a night of quiet rituals. There was the rhythmic scraping sound of whetstones honing the blades of swords and axes to a razor's edge. There was the soft clinking of chainmail as men mended their armor, and the hushed, murmured words of soldiers exchanging stories, prayers, or quiet jokes about the looming confrontation. In the command tent of the Polish-Lithuanian army, King Władysław II Jagiełło and the brilliant Grand Duke Vytautas conferred with their commanders, their faces illuminated by candlelight as they scrutinized maps and refined their final battle strategy. Their plan, a testament to their combined military genius, emphasized flexibility and adaptability, allowing for swift responses to the ever-changing and chaotic conditions of a great medieval battle. On the other side of the field, Grandmaster Ulrich von Jungingen, the proud and confident leader of the Teutonic forces, finalized his own aggressive strategy. He aimed to strike swiftly and decisively, leveraging the awesome power of his elite heavy cavalry and his well-trained infantry to shatter the morale of the Allied forces early in the engagement, hoping for a quick and glorious victory. As the night deepened, a different kind of preparation took place in both camps. Priests moved among the anxious troops, their dark robes a stark contrast to the glint of armor. They offered blessings and heard the hurried confessions of men who knew they might not see another sunrise. The cool night air filled with the soft sound of murmured prayers and the gentle strains of soft hymns, a poignant and stark contrast to the terrible violence that the dawn was certain to bring. But even in the darkness, the work of war continued. Scouts from both sides, cloaked in shadow, crept through the no-man's land between the two armies, gathering crucial, last-minute intelligence. They observed the enemy positions, they estimated troop strengths, and they listened intently for any hints of their opponent's battle plans. Their dangerous work, their reports whispered back to their commanders, would prove to be absolutely vital in the opening stages of the coming conflict. And then, as the first faint light of dawn began to break on the horizon, an unexpected and highly theatrical development unfolded. Two Teutonic messengers, heralds bearing the black cross of their order, approached the Polish-Lithuanian lines. They bore with them two magnificent, unsheathed swords, a gift sent by the Grand Master himself to King Yagiwo and Grand Duke Vytautas. This gesture, which would become famously known as the Grunwald Swords, was a deeply provocative and arrogant challenge. It was a piece of psychological warfare, a taunt that was meant to goad the Allied forces into a hasty and ill-conceived attack. The Polish-Lithuanian leaders, however, remained composed. They recognized this psychological tactic for what it was, and they refused to let it disrupt their carefully laid plans. Instead, with great political skill, they used the moment to rally their own troops, presenting the swords not as a challenge, but as a symbol of the knights' own arrogant overconfidence and a sign that their defeat was imminent. As the dawn finally broke, both armies began to form their great battle lines. Banners, heavy with embroidery, unfurled in the gentle morning breeze, displaying the proud heraldry of the noble houses and military units from all across Eastern Europe. And then, a light rain began to fall, a small detail that would have immense consequences. The rain dampened the Teutonic knights' field artillery powder, limiting them to just 2 ineffective cannon shots before the main battle commenced. And so, the two armies now faced each other across the rolling hills, the fate of all of Eastern Europe hanging precariously in the balance. The outcome of this confrontation would reshape the political landscape for generations to come, a single day that would determine the destiny of nations. As the morning mist finally dissipated from the fields of Grunwald, it revealed the vast and truly awe-inspiring expanse of the two assembled armies. On one side, the Teutonic knights, their pristine white surcoats emblazoned with the stark black cross, gleamed in the early light. They formed their lines with the practiced and unnerving precision of a professional military order, a wall of iron and faith that had known nothing but victory for centuries. Across the rolling field, the diverse and colourful Polish-Lithuanian forces stood ready, their numbers far greater, their banners a sea of different colours and sigils, but their resolve equally matched. And then, an unusual and profound silence fell over the battlefield. For what seemed like an eternity, the two armies stood facing each other under the climbing summer sun, a great, simmering tableau of tension. King Jagiello, in a calculated and masterful display of psychological warfare, hesitated to give the order to attack, deliberately heightening the pressure that permeated the air. The oppressive heat began to bear down on the heavily armoured Teutonic knights, who were forced to stand and wait in their metal armour, their impatience and frustration growing with each passing moment as they waited for a battle that would not begin. It was during this long, tense wait that the Grand Master of the Teutonic Order, Ulrich von Jungingen, made his famously arrogant and provocative gesture. He sent 2 heralds bearing 2 magnificent unsheathed swords to the Polish-Lithuanian leaders. Was this an act of chivalry or of supreme overconfidence? It was a taunt, a challenge that was meant to goad the allied kings into a hasty and ill-conceived attack out of anger and pride. The Polish-Lithuanian leaders, however, remained composed. They calmly accepted the swords, recognizing the psychological tactic for what it was, and skillfully used the moment to rally their own troops, presenting the swords as a symbol of the knights' arrogance and a sure omen of their impending defeat. Finally, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, King Jagiello gave the signal. The great battle commenced, not with the charge of the Polish heavy knights, but with the thunderous roar of the Lithuanian light cavalry on the right flank. The Grand Duke Vytautas gave the order, and his horsemen surged forward, their battle cries shattering the morning stillness as thousands of hooves pounded the earth. The Grand Marshal of the Teutonic Order, Friedrich von Wallenrod, leading the powerful right wing of the Teutonic army, moved to meet this charge head-on. The 2 great forces collided in a maelstrom of violence, a deafening crash of steel against steel and the desperate cries of men and horses that echoed across the plains. The initial engagement was characterized by fierce and chaotic close-quarters combat. The Lithuanian riders, true to their Eastern traditions, employed lightning-fast hit-and-run tactics, swirling around the heavily armored Teutonic knights like hornets, striking swiftly with their bows and lances, before retreating to regroup and charge again. The Teutonic knights, encased in their heavy armor and fighting as a solid, immovable block, countered with their disciplined shield wall formations, their heavy armor deflecting many of the lighter blows from the Lithuanian horsemen. For a time, it seemed that neither side could gain a clear advantage in this swirling chaos. Simultaneously, on the Polish left flank, the great banners of the Kingdom of Poland surged forward. The heavy cavalry, the very flower of Polish nobility, began their own thunderous charge, aimed directly at the Teutonic left wing. The very earth seemed to tremble beneath the immense weight of thousands of armored men and their powerful war horses. The Polish nobles, fighting for the honor of their kingdom and the preservation of their lands, matched the famed Teutonic knights, blow for blow in a furious and desperate struggle. For over an hour, the great battle raged with an undiminished and brutal intensity. The entire field became a chaotic tableau of countless individual duels and small unit skirmishes. It was a confusing cauldron of violence, with blood soaking the earth and discarded, broken weapons marking the constant ebb and flow of the brutal conflict. And as the battle hung precariously in the balance, the Lithuanian forces, who had borne the brunt of the initial, ferocious fighting, began to show the first signs of strain. Their lines, under the relentless and grinding pressure of the Teutonic heavy cavalry, began to waver, and it seemed, for a moment, that they were on the verge of breaking completely. It was at this critical juncture that a pivotal and highly controversial moment would occur, one that would change the course of the entire battle and seal the fate of the Teutonic Order. As the great battle raged on, with the Polish heavy cavalry locked in a brutal and grinding struggle on the left flank, a sudden and unexpected development began to unfold on the right. The Lithuanian troops, who had been fiercely engaged with the Teutonic knights for over an hour, weathering the storm of their heavy cavalry charges, began to withdraw from the field. This single movement, this retreat, whether it was a carefully planned tactical masterpiece or a desperate forced flight, would become the pivotal moment in the entire Battle of Grunwald, a turning point that would not only shape the final outcome of the day, but would also spark centuries of intense and passionate historical debate. From the perspective of the Teutonic Knights, watching the Lithuanian withdrawal, it must have seemed as though they were witnessing the very beginning of their great triumph. After an hour of brutal, inconclusive fighting, their relentless pressure had finally broken the enemy. Their spirits soared. They saw their adversaries seemingly fleeing the battlefield in disarray and panic. One Teutonic commander was said to have exclaimed with triumphant glee, "The Lithuanians break! Victory is within our grasp. This fatal and arrogant misinterpretation of the events that were unfolding before them, this assumption of an easy victory, would prove to be a costly and disastrous error. But what was the true nature of this retreat? This is the great question, the central mystery of the Battle of Grunwald. Was it a genuine rout, or a stroke of unparalleled military genius? The historical accounts, written in the aftermath of the battle, are conflicting, painting two very different pictures of what truly transpired on that fateful day. Some sources, particularly those more favourable to the Teutonic Order, describe the Lithuanian withdrawal as a complete and total rout, with the soldiers fleeing in panic and disarray under the relentless and unbearable pressure of the Teutonic heavy cavalry. It's an easy picture to imagine, a less disciplined force simply breaking under the weight of such a formidable and fearsome foe. Other, more nuanced interpretations, however, have proposed that this was not a rout at all. They suggest that it was, in fact, a brilliant and carefully planned tactical maneuver, a feigned retreat that was designed by the cunning Grand Duke Vytautas to lure the overconfident and arrogant Teutonic knights into a deadly trap. These sources point out that the Lithuanian retreat bore a striking similarity to the classic military techniques that were often employed by the nomadic steppe warriors from the east, such as the Golden Horde, with whom Vytautas had considerable military experience. These cavalry units were famous for their use of feigned retreats to disrupt enemy formations, to stretch their lines, and to lure them into vulnerable positions, a tactic that had proven to be incredibly effective in countless battles throughout history. Could Vytautas, one of the most brilliant military minds of his age, have orchestrated such a daring and complex maneuver on such a massive scale? Regardless of its true nature, whether it was a stroke of genius or a moment of sheer panic, the Lithuanian retreat had immediate and far-reaching consequences on the battlefield. The commanders of the Teutonic right wing, composed of their most elite and heavily armoured cavalry, saw what they believed to be a golden opportunity for a glorious and decisive victory. Breaking from their disciplined formations, they eagerly and impulsively pursued the withdrawing Lithuanians, hungry for the glory of the chase and the slaughter. This rash and undisciplined action, while seemingly advantageous in the heat of the moment, would prove to be a critical and fatal error. As the Teutonic knights chased after the retreating Lithuanians, they inadvertently and dangerously overextended their lines, galloping far away from the main battle and creating a significant and fatal gap in the Teutonic battle formation. This opening left their entire flank exposed and incredibly vulnerable, a dangerous situation to be in the midst of such a large-scale and chaotic engagement. The once solid and seemingly impenetrable Teutonic formation now had a gaping weak point, a vulnerability that could potentially be exploited by their cunning opponents. The shifting fortunes of the battle now resembled a great pendulum, swinging dramatically back and forth between the opposing forces. What had seemed like a moment of absolute triumph for the Teutonic knights was, in reality, the very beginning of their downfall. The Lithuanian retreat, like the receding tide before a great tsunami, had drawn the knights into a position of extreme vulnerability. And while this dramatic scene unfolded on one part of the battlefield, what of the Polish forces? On the left flank, they continued to hold their ground with incredible courage and unwavering determination against the main body of the Teutonic army. Their steadfast resistance, now that they were fighting alone and outnumbered, prevented the Teutonic knights from fully capitalizing on what they perceived as a great advantage gained from the Lithuanian retreat. This incredible determination of the Polish troops to hold the line at all costs would prove to be absolutely crucial in the next decisive phase of the great battle. The true nature and the intent of the Lithuanian retreat may forever remain a subject of intense debate among historians. But whether it was a panicked flight or a brilliant tactical ploy, this single moment had marked a significant and irreversible turning point in the Battle of Grunwald. a moment that would seal the fate of the Teutonic Order.
As the last of the Lithuanian forces vanished from the battlefield, a new and terrifying reality descended upon the Polish forces, who were now under the direct command of King Jagiełło. They were alone. The Grandmaster of the Teutonic Order, the proud and confident Ulrich von Jungingen, seeing the sudden and dramatic departure of the Lithuanians, believed that the moment of his great triumph had finally arrived. He now sought to bring the full and undivided might of his army to bear, to break the remaining Polish lines and to secure a final, glorious and decisive victory. The renowned and formidable Polish heavy cavalry, the very pride of the kingdom, now found themselves suddenly and dangerously outnumbered, fighting a desperate battle for their very survival. The absence of their Lithuanian allies had left a glaring and dangerous vulnerability in their formation, a weakness that the Teutonic Knights, with their centuries of battlefield experience, swiftly and ruthlessly began to exploit. The clash of steel, which had already been deafening, now intensified to a hellish roar as the knights pressed their advantage. Their white surcoats with the stark black crosses became a relentless, surging sea of motion across the blood-soaked field. It was in this critical moment, believing his enemy to be on the verge of collapse, that the Grandmaster, Ulrich von Jungingen, made a bold and ultimately fatal decision, one that would shape the final course of the battle. He decided to lead the final crushing charge himself. He gathered 16 of his best and most elite banners, a force that represented nearly a third of his remaining army. Can you picture it? The very ground trembled under the thundering hooves of hundreds upon hundreds of heavily armored war horses as they charged like an avalanche of steel directly towards the Polish lines. And what was their target? It was the great royal banner of Krakow, the sacred standard that was the very heart and soul of the Polish army. The knights guarding the royal banner, knowing that its loss would be a devastating, perhaps fatal, blow to the morale of the entire army, fought with an unparalleled and desperate ferocity. It was here, in the chaotic melee around the banner, that legends were born. A young knight named Zindram, his armor gleaming in the harsh sunlight, stood out, felling multiple Teutonic knights in rapid succession and rallying his comrades with his incredible valor. But the pressure was immense. For a heart-stopping moment, the great banner faltered, dipping dangerously towards the ground. It seemed as though it might fall, a moment that could have turned the tide of the entire battle and sealed Poland's fate. King Jagiełło, observing this desperate struggle from a nearby hill, his heart no doubt pounding in his chest, made a crucial and difficult decision. He committed his final reserves to the battle. These fresh troops, who had been held back for just such a desperate moment, surged forward into the fray, lending a new and vital strength to the beleaguered Polish forces. The battle now reached its absolute zenith, a brutal, grinding struggle with neither side yielding a single inch of ground. The cries of the wounded and the dying mingled with the constant, deafening clash of weapons and the thunderous impact of cavalry charges. The very earth seemed to groan under the immense weight of this titanic struggle. For the men caught in the melee, the world narrowed to a terrifying few feet, a space where life and death were decided by a single stroke of skill or a moment of will. The Polish knights fought with the desperation of men defending their homeland, while the Teutonic warriors fought to uphold the long and proud honor of their order. And just as the Polish lines seemed ready to finally buckle under the immense and relentless pressure, a new and unexpected sight appeared on the horizon. The Lithuanians had returned. Having successfully regrouped after their brilliant tactical retreat, they now came thundering back onto the field. Their sudden and shocking reappearance shifted the entire momentum of the battle in a single, dramatic instant. What must the Teutonic Knights have thought in that moment? The men who had been so confidently pursuing the Lithuanians were now caught completely by surprise, trapped in a precarious and deadly position. The resurgent Polish-Lithuanian forces, their spirits buoyed by this stunning reversal of fortunes, now launched a powerful and coordinated assault from two directions. A classic hammer and the anvil maneuver. The steadfast Polish forces became the anvil, holding the line, while the returning Lithuanian cavalry became the great hammer, crashing into the now exposed rear of the Teutonic army. The Teutonic forces were now threatened with complete envelopment. Grandmaster Ulrich von Jungingen, the very man who had committed so much of his force to his own bold charge, now found himself in grave danger of being cut off and surrounded. The battle now entered its final, decisive phase. Grand Duke Vytautas, leading his returning Lithuanian cavalry, directed his forces in a devastating charge against the now disorganized rear of the Teutonic right flank, splitting the enemy lines and throwing them into complete and utter disarray. The knights who had so eagerly pursued the Lithuanians earlier now found themselves isolated and vulnerable, attacked from both the front and the rear. The battlefield transformed into a series of chaotic and desperate melees as the once disciplined Teutonic formation began to completely fracture under the relentless Polish-Lithuanian assault. The Grandmaster, witnessing the utter disintegration of his army, frantically issued orders to regroup, but it was too late. The distinctive white surcoats of the Teutonic knights, now stained with mud and blood, became isolated islands in a raging sea of combat. The dream of Teutonic dominion was crumbling before the determined and brilliant onslaught of the Polish-Lithuanian forces, their great gamble having turned into a catastrophic and fatal tragedy.
The Fall of the Grandmaster, revised version, rewritten text, part 9. As the long, dramatic afternoon began to fade into a hazy red twilight, the fate of the Teutonic Order, an institution that had shaped the course of Eastern Europe for 2 centuries, now hung precariously in the balance. The Grandmaster, the proud and formidable Ulrich von Jungingen, the very embodiment of the Order's immense power and prestige, found himself confronted with a dire and almost unbelievable situation. His once formidable army, which had marched onto the fields of Grunwald with such supreme and arrogant confidence just a few hours earlier, now lay fragmented, exhausted, and almost completely surrounded. Their dreams of dominion over the Baltic region were crumbling before the determined and relentless onslaught of the Polish-Lithuanian forces. In this moment of absolute and escalating crisis, with his army on the very verge of total collapse, von Jungingen made a decision that would resonate through the annals of military history. A final, desperate, and incredibly heroic gamble. What does a great leader do when all seems lost? Does he surrender? Does he attempt to flee? Ulrich von Jungingen chose a different path. Realizing the perilous state of his army, he gathered his most elite and loyal knights around him, the very cream of Teutonic chivalry. These were the men who had sworn sacred oaths to fight to the very end for their order. Warriors clad in their distinctive white surcoats, emblazoned with the stark black cross, now weathered by the grime and toil of a long day's battle. They represented the last, fading hope for a Teutonic reversal of fortune. And von Jungingen, in a final breathtaking display of both sheer desperation and incredible chivalric valor, chose to lead a final charge himself. What was his aim? Was it a calculated tactical move to break through the encircling Polish-Lithuanian lines and create an escape route? Or was it a final glorious act of defiance, a choice to meet his end in the heat of battle, rather than in the shame of surrender? We may never know for sure. As the Grandmaster and his chosen band of warriors prepared for their assault, a new and terrible tension gripped the battlefield. The air, already thick with the din of clashing steel and the cries of the conflict, seemed to thicken even further, as if holding its breath for this final dramatic act. Von Jungingen, his magnificent armor glinting in the fading dramatic light, raised his great sword high. "For God and the Order!" he cried, his voice ringing out across the field as he spurred his powerful warhorse forward. The thunderous hoofbeats of his elite force echoed across the field as they charged like a thunderbolt directly into the thickest and most desperate fighting, a small, white-clad island of defiance against a raging sea of enemies. The Teutonic Knights crashed into the Polish-Lithuanian lines with immense and ferocious force. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, their desperate gambit seemed as though it might actually succeed. The sheer ferocity of their assault, born of desperation, staggered the Allied forces, creating a small, temporary breach in their formation, a fleeting glimmer of hope in the twilight. Yet the numerical superiority of the Polish-Lithuanian army was simply too great to overcome. The breach was quickly sealed, and the Grandmaster's elite force found itself completely enveloped, fighting a desperate battle on all sides. As the great battle raged around the Grandmaster, his final, heroic moments became shrouded in the fog of war, a chaotic tapestry of conflicting accounts and heroic last stands. Some historical chronicles claim that von Jungingen, fighting valiantly in the thick of the melee, was finally brought down by a lance thrust from a Polish knight. Other accounts describe a more personal and chaotic confrontation, with the Grandmaster, unhorsed and fighting on foot, finally being overwhelmed by his foes in the brutal close-quarters combat. The famous Polish chronicler Jan Długosz recorded a particularly vivid account of von Jungingen's last stand. According to Długosz, the Grandmaster fought with remarkable and inspiring valor, his great sword a blur of motion as he held off several Polish knights, before finally being surrounded and overcome by the sheer weight of numbers. His final stand had come to a heroic and tragic end. The fall of the great Grandmaster, Ulrich von Jungingen, sent a final devastating shockwave through the Teutonic ranks. As word of their leader's demise, whispered and then shouted from man to man, spread like wildfire through the battlefield, many of the remaining knights lost all heart. The profound psychological impact of losing their Grandmaster, their leader, and their symbol, combined with their already precarious and hopeless military situation, proved to be too much for the Order's morale to bear. Von Jungingen's death marked the true and final turning point in the battle. While some small pockets of Teutonic resistance remained, fighting on with the desperate courage of men who knew their cause was utterly lost, the overall outcome was no longer in any doubt. The Polish-Lithuanian forces, emboldened by their incredible success and sensing their final total victory, now pressed their advantage with renewed vigor. As the sun finally set on the fields of Grunwald, the final phase of the battle transformed from a desperate struggle into a complete and total rout. The once mighty Teutonic battle formation had disintegrated into utter chaos, and with it, the Order's long and ambitious dreams of dominion over the Baltic region. The Polish and Lithuanian cavalry pursued the fleeing Teutonic knights into the fading light, while their infantry surrounded the last desperate pockets of resistance. The great battle was finally over. The black cross of the Teutonic Order had been broken as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long and somber shadows across the blood-soaked fields of Grunwald. The true and terrible cost of the great victory began to emerge. The fall of the Grandmaster, Ulrich von Jungingen, had shattered the Teutonic Order's resolve, transforming their once formidable army into a scattered and desperate rabble. Many of the surviving knights, their iconic white surcoats now stained with mud and gore, attempted to flee the carnage in the gathering darkness, while others formed small, desperate pockets of resistance, fighting on with grim determination until they were overwhelmed. The Polish-Lithuanian forces, though utterly exhausted from hours of the most intense and brutal combat, now faced the crucial task of securing their hard-won and monumental triumph. King Jagiello and Grand Duke Vytautas issued swift orders to their commanders. The Allied cavalry thundered across the battlefield in pursuit of the fleeing Teutonic knights, while the infantry began the grim task of mopping up the last pockets of resistance. What did the battlefield look like in that moment? It had been transformed into a grotesque and haunting tableau of medieval warfare's true brutality. Thousands of bodies lay strewn across the trampled earth, their armor glinting dully in the fading light. Priests moved among the fallen, offering last rites to friend and foe alike, while surgeons worked frantically in the flickering torchlight to save those who could be saved. The very cream of the Teutonic leadership had been cut down, a blow from which the Order's military command would never truly recover. The dust had barely settled on the battlefield when a new and immense challenge emerged for the victorious Polish-Lithuanian alliance. Despite their resounding and total triumph in the field, the true test now lay in capitalizing on this momentum to strike at the very heart of Teutonic power. The Order's imposing and seemingly impregnable fortress of Marienburg. This was the final obstacle that stood between the alliance and a total and complete victory. However, as the Allied forces gathered after the grueling battle, a critical window of opportunity began to slip away. The army was exhausted, and there were immense logistical challenges in moving such a large force. This delay in marching on Marienburg Castle, though understandable, would prove to be incredibly costly. It gave the battered Teutonic Order precious time to regroup and to fortify their defences, setting the stage for a long and difficult siege. A man named Heinrich von Plauen, who had missed the catastrophic defeat at Grunwald, now found himself thrust into this crisis. With remarkable speed and skill, he organised the castle's defences, rallying the surviving knights and local citizens. He was seen on the battlements, shouting encouragement and defiance, reigniting the spirits of his men. By late July, the siege of Marienburg began in earnest. The Polish-Lithuanian forces now faced a fortress that lived up to its legendary reputation. Marienburg's massive walls, complemented by moats and drawbridges, seemed unbreakable. As the weeks of the siege stretched into months, the besieging army faced its own mounting challenges. Their supply lines were stretched thin, and disease began to spread through the ranks. Diplomatic maneuvers also added a new layer of complexity, as the Order's allies across Europe began to exert political pressure on King Jagiełło to end the campaign. By September, the harsh realities of the siege were clear. Marienburg, under the brilliant leadership of von Plauen, showed no signs of capitulating. On September 19, 1410, the siege was lifted. The Polish-Lithuanian army withdrew, leaving the great fortress battered but unbroken. The failure to capture Marienburg limited the immediate impact of the victory at Grunwald, allowing the Order to maintain a crucial foothold in the region. And so, the two great powers found themselves at a crossroads. The sweeping victory on the battlefield had not translated into the swift collapse of the Order that many had anticipated. As the harsh winter of 1410 set in, the appetite for a diplomatic resolution grew on both sides. The Peace of Thorn was signed on February 1st, 1411, and its terms were surprisingly modest. Poland regained Dobrin land, and Lithuania's control over Samogitia was recognized, but only for the lifetimes of Jagiełło and Vytautas. The most significant provision was the substantial financial indemnity that was imposed on the Teutonic Order. Why were the terms so lenient? Perhaps the Allies, exhausted and facing political pressure, chose a swift peace over a prolonged war. While many in Poland and Lithuania felt the treaty fell far short of what they had earned, its true impact was psychological. The Battle of Grunwald had shattered the aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Teutonic Knights for 2 centuries. The financial burden of the indemnity proved to be a crushing, killing blow for the Order. To meet the payments, they were forced to raise taxes, leading to widespread discontent among their own subjects. This accelerated their economic decline and plunged them into a profound crisis of identity and purpose from which they would never recover. The Battle of Grunwald's impact extended far beyond the immediate aftermath. It cemented the rise of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth as a major European power. However, this new ascendancy brought its own challenges. as the vast and diverse Commonwealth would face its own internal struggles in the centuries to come. The weakened Teutonic Order faced mounting internal pressures culminating in further rebellions and the 13 Years' War, which ultimately saw the order become a vassal of the Polish crown. But what is the truest and most enduring legacy of this great battle? It is its profound effect on the development of national identities in the region. In Poland and Lithuania, the victory became a powerful and enduring symbol of national pride and resistance against foreign domination, immortalized in art, literature, and popular culture. It would be invoked centuries later by nationalist movements as a rallying cry against foreign occupation, a potent symbol of national unity and determination. The battle marked the effective end of the crusading era in the region and led to a re-evaluation of the role of military religious orders throughout Europe. It was a pivotal moment in military history as well, challenging the long-held assumptions about the supremacy of heavy armored cavalry and ushering in a new era of tactical sophistication. As we reflect on this great battle, we are reminded that its legacy is not just one of military victory, but of profound political and cultural transformation, a story whose echoes continue to resonate in the history and identity of Eastern Europe to this very day. And with that, our story of the Great Battle of Grunwald comes to its end. Let the echoes of clashing steel and the cries of battle now fade into the quiet of the night. It is time for history to rest, and it is time for you to rest as well. Good night, and have peaceful dreams.